Namaskar, good afternoon. I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on the challenges and opportunities that we have in the current global scenario. First, मैं माफ़ी मांगूंगा, मैं हिंदी में बोलने का कोशिश नहीं करूंगा क्योंकि मैं बंगाली हूँ और करूंगा और करूंगी में उसमें गड़बड़ हो जाएगा, इसलिए मैं अंग्रेजी में बोलूँ। और आप हिंदी में बोल सकते हैं, मैं हिंदी समझता हूँ, हिंदी बोल भी लेता हूँ। अगर आपके बगल में बैठूंगा तो हिंदी बोल लूँगा, मगर ये मंच पे उपस्थित होके हिंदी में बोलने का हिम्मत मेरा नहीं है। See, the IMF in its April 2026 World Economic Outlook has used the phrase global economy in the shadow of war. I think shadow of war is the appropriate phrase that characterize the current global scenario. War in the Gulf between the US and Israel on the one hand and Iran on the other has been going on from 28 February 2026. It has affected many states in the Persian Gulf region. It has resulted in disruption of maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Gulf of Hormuz is one of the most strategically important choke points of world trade, with a fifth of the world's liquefied natural gas and a quarter of the seaborne oil trade passing through the strait annually. So it's a very important strait. Trade in petroleum and LNG have been disrupted, and price of Brent crude per barrel has gone up. I was looking at it today, has gone up from $67 in January 26 by almost 75% to over $117 in April 2026. Simultaneously, there is supply disruption. It's not only the price, but we are not getting enough, as much as we want. Petroleum is a universal intermediate and needed for transportation, power generation, production of fertilizer, plastics and many chemicals. And many countries like India and Japan rely heavily on imports to meet our domestic requirements. The current crisis in the Gulf can be seen as a supply shock. You have the demand curve and you have the supply curve. The supply curve has shifted to the left. Supply has gone down. And this adverse supply shock threatens to ignite inflation and slow down growth. Its overall impact will depend on how long it lasts. The example is if it's influenza and you know you're down for a few days, you're not worried. But if it's typhoid or jaundice that will affect you for months, then you are worried. So, it is difficult to predict how long hostilities will last. When will the ceasefire and the end of hostilities come? I am no expert on foreign policy, spoken to few, their differing views. But I believe that given the horrendous power of mutual destruction that modern weapons possess, good sense will prevail and there will be no escalation of hostilities and the war will end sooner than later. But that may be my optimism also. But if you know that you have a gun but I have a knife, you can kill me, but I'll also chop off your nose or ear before you kill me, then your enthusiasm for attacking me will be less. The current crisis has driven home a few things that we have done right in the past, and a few more that we need to do going forward. First is the importance of having a robust external sector and foreign exchange reserve. Post-independence, we have had several shocks. First, none of you are born. Most of you are not born at that time. I was just a small child. Is the Suez Crisis in 1956. Then the first oil shock after the Yom Kippur War in October 73, and the second oil shock following the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And what happened? Oil prices skyrocketed. In all these three cases, we had a foreign exchange crisis and had to run to the external agencies like the IMF for exceptional balance of payment support. Now, with foreign exchange reserves of around $700 billion, equivalent to 9 months' imports, an adverse external shock does not translate immediately to a foreign exchange crisis. It's not that Reserve Bank is telling you, no, you can't get foreign exchange. There is no rationing or anything. The price of the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar has changed, that's a different matter. Second is to have market-determined price of petroleum products. During the earlier shocks, petroleum prices were administratively determined. So if the world price of oil goes up and you don't revise your domestic prices, it results in a fiscal deficit or a quasi-fiscal deficit. Now with such prices more or less market determined, I won't say completely market determined, but more or less market determined, such a problem of large hidden deficits do not arise. Previously, you had to do research to find out how much deficit is accumulating because the oil price internationally has gone up and you haven't revised the domestic prices. We should and we do worry about vulnerable sections that we prefer to do it with transfers. You can always ask this question, that what about the poor? See, petroleum when it comes to use, even energy, we are sitting in air-conditioned comfort. We use more energy. We ride cars or scooters or motorbikes. I spent 5 years in a semi-rural constituency in West Bengal, so I know the poor consume much less petroleum products and energy than us. But still they need help. But are you going to do it through the subsidy? That you get this money only if you consume petroleum? Or do you give a transfer? I think there is progress in the sense most of us agree that if you need to help the poor and the vulnerable, the best way is transfer, not subsidy. That you get this benefit only if you eat 4 chapatis per night. If I don't want to eat chapatis but I want to eat sattu, then also I should get the same money. There is no reason why it should come tied to a commodity. That's a subsidy. Subsidy is a transfer which is tied to a commodity. You get this transfer only if you eat wheat or rice. The current Hormuz crisis gives us an opportunity to think about and act on, one, diversification of sources of supply of oil, so that the Hormuz choke point cannot trouble us in future so much. So diversification of sources of supply is important. But it cannot be done overnight. It has to be done slowly in a very calculated way. Second, strengthening energy efficiency and self-reliance by harnessing solar, hydro, wind, and nuclear power. Third, oil exploration. It's a very risky business because you dig holes, you may not find oil. In fact, if you read the history of oil exploration in the United States, in Pennsylvania, when the oil boom was taking place, you are the lucky one, you go and ply a plot of land, and you dig, you find petrol. I'm the unlucky one, I dig the same hole 200 feet away, I don't get anything. So it's a risky business that we must keep in mind. And fourth is increasing energy efficiency, including the rationalization of tariffs. By tariffs, I mean electricity charges. We must decide, do we want to give subsidized energy to households and charge more for industrial use? In China, as you may know, they subsidize industrial tariff by charging more to households. Here, we subsidize or prefer to give concession to domestic power supply than supplying power to industry. The current global scenario, you must remember, is not an isolated case of less than benign situation. We faced the 2008 financial crisis following the collapse of the Lehman Brothers and quantitative easing by the Federal Reserve Board. Then the 2013 surge in US Treasury yields resulting from the Federal Reserve's announcement of future tapering of its policy of quantitative easing, what was called a taper tantrum. Next, the COVID pandemic of 2019, the weaponization of trade under the Trump administration, breakdown of the rule-based multilateral trading system and tariff war, and finally, the hostilities in the Gulf from February of the current year. It has been a continuously challenging time for policymakers all over the world, including India. India has done well. As you can see in the World Economic Outlook, I'm very happy that we are almost mourning that rate of growth is only 6%. But I remember I was then teaching in Delhi School of Economics. Babu Rajkrishna, one of our professors, distinguished professors, coined the term Hindu rate of growth. Why it was called Hindu, we didn't understand, but we liked the phrase. Jo marzi kar lo, 3.5%. 3%, 3.5%, that was the rate of growth that we sustained for decades. And now the rate of growth, according to the IMF, I think it's 6.2 or 6.3. And the whole of India is mourning. Ye kya ho raha hai? Why isn't it 8? Aspiration is the beginning of development. We aspire and we'll do it. So, I'm saying India has done well, but while we have availed of some of the opportunities that such challenging times offer, there is more to do. What have we done, you may ask? What are the good things that you have done? As an example, consider with the global trading system increasingly fragmenting, with a shift from globalization toward friendshoring and nearshoring, and continuous supply chain readjustments or realignments, and higher uncertainty in trade flows, India has steadily expanded its network of free trade agreements and what is called the comprehensive economic and trade agreements. So there is a debate whether you should have bilateral treaties or multilateral treaties. And my own belief is multilateral, if it is available, is much better. But when multilateral is not working, what can you do? You should have bilateral. So, over the past few years, we have reached 9 FTAs spanning 38 countries and significantly strengthens our global trade integration. The Indian-UK Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, I'll call it CETA, signed in July 2025. The India-Oman SEPA, concluded in December 2025. The India-New Zealand FTA, announced in December 2025. And the Indian-EU Free Trade Agreement, concluded in January 2026, are expected to significantly expand market access, strengthen supply chain resilience, and diversify India's export destinations. Let me now say a few words where we can do more and much more to not only face the current challenging situation, but to expedite our development and progress towards the goal of Vikasit Bharat 2047. I'm just giving you a few examples. It's not an exhaustive list. First is to expedite the attainment of 100% foundational literacy and numeracy, primary health care for all, and reduce the logistic cost through better roads, railways, ports, assured and reasonable priced electricity. Let me say a few words on all three of them. First is the issue of foundational literacy and numeracy. So our ancestors or our earlier generation have done a great thing. Enrollment is not a problem. Now the children are going to school. I've seen for myself in, very distant, remote villages. Children go to school. But are we achieving what we wanted to achieve in terms of the children being able to read and write? I would catch hold of a little one, 3, 4 of them. They're carrying the book. I'll open it in one page and say, read. 3 out of 5 or 2 out of 5 wouldn't be able to read. They're in class 3, class 4. They wouldn't be able to add, subtract. That you must have seen from the various surveys that have been done. Now, to me, foundational literacy and numeracy is very important. Why? Because this boy who grows up, he is using fertilizer. He buys a bag of fertilizer, but he can't read. So he wouldn't know how much to give per acre. So to be able to read is very important. Similarly, to be able to add, you buy mangoes from that little girl who grows up. She doesn't know how to multiply. You buy 5 mangoes at 12 rupees each. She wouldn't know whether you're paying her the right price when you pay her 55 or that the price should be 60. So foundational literacy and numeracy is something that we have to resolve. We cannot afford to leave any of these little ones without primary knowledge of education and numeracy, literacy and numeracy. Second is primary health care. We often talk about multi-speciality hospitals, super-speciality hospitals. What I have found is that most of us, or the poorer ones, we are privileged. They suffer from morbidity, low-level morbidity, stomach upsets, fever, some small appendicitis, or even delivery. Now, for that, you don't need an All-India Institute of Medical Science. For by all means, have as many super specialty hospitals as you like. But the more fundamental requirement is primary health care centers. All you need there is an MBBS doctor, not even an MD or MS, who can cure a snake bite, who can tell you that your stomach is upset, don't eat pakores, now have this tablet, you'll be okay. So this primary health care is a must. And if you happen to go to a primary health care center, you will find many of the primary health care centers do not function night and day. And my sister is not going to have the delivery pain only during daytime. It may happen during night also. I may be bitten by a snake, not during daytime, but night also. So we need to keep the primary health centers open 24 hours in the day and night. We need to have delivery rooms there. We need to have inpatient facility, because for many of them I don't need to go to an MD or MS or a super specialist. An MBBS doctor or a trained nurse is good enough, but you need to give me a bed where I can lie down. Second or third is the logistics. We cannot afford to have infrastructure in this state. Now, I went from Ahmedabad to Baroda. I was delighted. That was the first time I was traveling on an Indian road where it was written minimum speed 100. Most of the time. Now we also have Jamuna Expressway. We have this connected. I have not traveled by it as yet to Dehradun. But we should be able to go from one place to another at a reasonable pace and time. Railways during independence. At the time of independence, we had more railway route kilometers than China. Now China has gone far ahead. So we need to expand our infrastructure, physical infrastructure. That is a major requirement. Let me add another point before I stop. Another thing that we must do is the ease of doing business. Both domestic and foreign investment have a huge scope for increase. Now here, I'll say something contrarian. I believe higher savings is essential for higher investment. Because in most countries, there may be a few exceptions here and there. United States is one of them when it was growing fast earlier this century, last century, and late 19th century. But it's domestic savings that finances domestic investment mostly. The East Asian tigers and China used to save a much higher proportion of their GDP than India when they were growing rapidly. China saved almost a half or a little more than half of its GDP in the early 2010s, while we still languish at less than 30%. Now, many times you talk about demand problem. So you'll say, why do you want us to save more? We need to consume more to stimulate demand. But investment also creates demand. Investment is not a non-demand creating thing. But at the same time, we must also have an efficient financial sector to intermediate the savings into investment. Are we getting too high a rate on our deposit? I don't think so. But if you look around, investors or entrepreneurs are looking for money. They get it at a much higher rate. The spread between savings, the rate, deposit rate and lending rate should not be that much. It should be, savers should get a high rate of return and investors should get a reasonable cost of investment. So we need to improve our financial sector. And for that, of course, it's very important to reduce the NPAs, because if you have NPAs, then the spread will increase, because the banks have to make up what they're not getting in terms of their existing loans from the new loans that they're giving. Now, lack of savings or funding is perhaps not the only or even the main problem of why investment is lacking. We must look around ourselves to see what the hurdles are in investing in India. Are we providing the requisite ease of doing business to attract the investment? I believe the honest answer is no. We are making progress, but we need to progress much more to attract investment. Now, I have only given you a sample of things that we can do. In Niti Aayog, we try and work and try to find out what can be done. But in short, let me conclude by saying these are challenging times, but such challenging times also provide opportunities to do more reforms. We must remember that many times we cannot change the wind. We may not be able to do much about the hostilities that is going on in Gulf of Hormuz. We cannot change the wind, but we can trim our sails. And I request all of you, I have a belief that most of you are in business, policy making, economists, thinking about such things. Let's trim our sails and do as much as we can to make progress. Thank you very much.